Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday. Was it Zion Tishrei? Today we're learning the third Perek of Kilayim. So it's a difficult Perek. It's not an easy one. It's not that long, but it's definitely difficult. Very technical, very mathematically inclined for the mathematically challenged. Um, okay, today's shir is sponsored the Eli Nishmas Aaron Nachman B'Tzimcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai Ben Shepsel, Bracha Sar Bashmol Leib, Moshe Ben Yosef B'Soch Sharch, and the show is having Aliyah. Amen. And the first lema Ada Sarah Bas Leah B'Soch Shar Chali Yisrael. Okay, Mishnah Aleph, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph, Aruga, he Shisha Tvachim, Al Shisha Tvachim. So you have a garden, like a patch of field in the garden that is 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim. 6 tvachim is essentially a very small size. It's about 2 feet, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. It's like an amma square almost. Um, Zorin besocha chamisha zerunin. If you think you can't plant much in a 2 amma square patch, but what he's saying what he's saying is that you can plant 5 kinds of vegetables in a 6 by 6 tvachim patch. How do you do that? Four on the four corners of the patch, the one in the middle. However, it's usher to plant more than 5 kinds in the patch the size. That would look like a kilayim. So haya lagvul, right? So they're showing um so there's different ways of arranging these formations for maximum benefit. You look at the pictures, you can either go like here where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, then you have the fifth side, like this major patch over here is number 5, or you can have a smaller diamond in the middle and a larger area around the perimeter, where you're not using the corners and there's still some space between the angles. There's like 4 triangles over here, but there's different ways of arranging the field in that little patch of land. If the patch has a raised border surrounding it, that is a tefach high and a tefach wide, Zorin b'socha shlosha asar, we may plant it in this patch as many as 13 species. How's that? Shlosha al kol gvul, 3 on each raised border, and 3 times 4 is 12. And 1 in the middle of the patch, like this. See over here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all right, 12, and then 1 in the middle is 13. So, but there's an exception. Lo yita rosh halefes b'sochak wool, one may not plant the head of a turnip as one of the species in the border. Why? Why a turnip? Bifnei shehu because it fills up the border with its large leaves. This gives the appearance of it being mixed with the species next to it, and as a Maris Ayin, they don't let you do that. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda has a different approach. He says Shisha be'emsa, you can plant 6 types of vegetables in the middle of the patch with a raised border. Right, and you can plant 6. So you have 12 along the sides, three on each side. It's 12, and 6 in the middle is 18, like in this diagram over here. And before we had Here we had one in the middle. Over here you have 6 in the middle and 3 on all 4 sides. So this is 18. Okay, Mr. Bays. Mishnah Bays. So we're continuing for the last Mishnah. Kol min zeraim ein zeraim baruga. Any kind of plant classified as zeraim cannot be planted among the 5 species permitted in a 6x6 garden patch. The kol min yakus zon baruga. But any kind of plant classified as Yerakos, as vegetables, may be planted among the 5 species permitted in a garden patch. So it's considered seeds or grain, and you can't. Or if it's a vegetable, you can. Why? Because this law only applies to vegetables known as Yerakos, not as why? Let's see. Because they generally grow in small patches of land. But the seeds, like the wheat and everything, grow in large fields. So therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Mustard and smooth beans, min zeraim, are classified as types of zeraim and cannot be planted as one of the 5 species in a 6x6 patch. Afunim hagamlanim, but large beans, min yarek, is a type of yarek, and then it may be planted as one of the 5 species. Okay. Gavul shehi shaya gavoa tavach and a border that was originally 1 tefach high, but later eroded and was reduced to less than a tefach. Kosher is still valid. Shahaya kosher mitchilos, this was valid at the start. I mean, when he started it, it was in the right dimensions, and the guy wrote it. That's not a problem. But if you started it when it was eroded and then you built it afterwards, that's a problem. Hatalav amasamayim, if a furrow or a water channel, shehem amukim tefach, are 1 tefach deep, zarin l'sach and shlosha zerun. We may plant in them 3 different kinds of seeds of those classified as yirakos, as vegetables. Echa bikan, vecha bikan. One on top of one side of the furrow, one on top of the other side. Vecha be'emsa, and one inside the middle. He provided there's a space of 1.5 tefachim left between them. Even though it looks like the furrow is completely trapped, it's surrounded with other species, nevertheless, it's mutter because there's still a proper distance between all 3 species. Okay, Mr. Gimel, Haya Rosh Tor Yarak v'nichnas the Yarak Acher. If a Rosh Tor, it's a Rosh Tor, the corner of the field containing one kind of vegetable extended into a field that contains another type of vegetable. Mutter, it's permitted. Because the corner looks like the end of his first field, doesn't look like one kind of vegetable growing in a field for another kind of vegetable. It doesn't give off that appearance. Said Haisa Sadehu Zerua Yerek, if his field is planted in one type of vegetable, and he wishes to plant in this field a row of another kind of vegetable, by leaving the proper separation between the row and the rest of the field. Rabbi Shmuel says, he may do so only if the furrow he plants extends completely through the field from one end to the other. Rabbi Akiva says, it's enough if the furrow has a length of 6 tvachim, and a width of a full furrow, which is also 6 tvachim. but it doesn't need to extend to the entire field. If Yehuda says, Rachav, Rachav, a person, that the furrow need only be as wide as the full width of the sole of a foot, which is a tefach. That's all it needs to be. Plain and simple. Okay, the next mission is going to talk about three different cases. The because the previous mission talked about planting a row of one kind of vegetable in a field of another kind of vegetable. And now we're going to learn about planting rows containing different kinds of vegetables next to each other in an empty field, and that they're separated by a 6 tefachim furrow. Nevertheless, even with those parameters, there are still situations where this is forbidden, according to the Mishnah here. So, Mishnah Dalet, Hanoteya shtei shuros kishuin. A person plants 2 rows of cucumbers. Shtei shuros daluim, 2 rows of gourds. Shtei shuros pulamitzri, and 2 rows of Egyptian beans next to one another. Mutter, it is permitted. Why? Because two rows of one kind of vegetable doesn't look 2 rows of one kind of vegetable look like one field. Since each of these fields is separated from the other, if they're not Kilayim, even though their leaves reach each other. The second case, Shura Shal Kishuva, if he plants 1 row of cucumbers, the Shura Shal Daluim, 1 row of gourds. Before we talked about 2, I talked about 1. Shura Shal Pulamitzri, 1 row of Egyptian beans. Usher is prohibited because now they just now it just looks like a jumble of multiple types and not like doesn't look like 7 fields. In the third case, Shura Shal Kishuva, he plants 1 row of cucumbers, Shura Shal Daluim, 1 row of gourds, Shura Shal Pulamitzri, 1 row of Egyptian beans, the Shura Shal Kishuim, and again a final row of cucumbers. You had 4 rows altogether with the cucumbers on the exterior sides and the 2 other things in the middle. Rebelezer Matir, Rebelezer says it's good, and the Chacham say no, because since the 2 outer rows of cucumbers, then Rebelezer combines them to make it a field of cucumbers, and the other 2 rows are the other 2 rows are viewed as 2 rows of other vegetables planted in a field of cucumbers. But the Chachamim said no, they don't consider this to be a field of cucumbers because the 2 rows of cucumbers are not next to one another. Okay, moving right along. Mishnah Hey, Noteya Adam Kishus with the laws, the Sof Guma Achas. A person may plant the cucumber and a gourd in the same hole. Provided this plant leads to this side of the hole, and the other plant leads to the other side. You can plant them in the same hole, but they have to grow separate ways to appear differently. And note say are the kam the kam, and he makes the hair of this plant lean to here, and the leaves of this plant lean to there. Because whatever the Chachamim prohibited, it was simply because of Maras Ayin, based on appearances. Because if they appear to be mixed together, then it's usher. If they do not appear to be mixed together, then it's mutter. Hai says Sadehu's the Ruah, but seldom we're going to Mishnah Vav. If a person's field is planted with onions, the vakish lita b'socha b'shura shaltaluim, wishes to plant rows of gourds in it. How should he proceed? Rabbi Shmuel says, okay, shuros, the uproot 2 rows of onions, thereby clearing a space 8 amos wide. and then he plants one row of gourds in the center of the clearing. Um, he then leaves standing the onions that are in a place fit for two rows. He leaves the next 8 amos of onions growing in their place. And he may then uproot the next two rows again, clearing a space that's 8 amos wide. And he plants one row of gourds. In the center of this clearing, he can continue this pattern. So, like here in this picture, you can see what it's talking about over here. You have two rows of onions. There's one row of cucumbers, and then two rows of onions, and one row of cucumbers, and two rows of onions. This is in a 12 amma field where you have you're basically leaving space between the bigger and the smaller on all the sides. What are we talking about over here? That picture was clear. That's the first opinion. Second opinion, if Akiva says, okay, stay shuros. Where am I? I think over here. He uproots two rows of onions, and Mateya stays shuros, and he plants two rows of gourds. I might have said this before, I don't remember. He then leaves standing onions that okay, I read this already. Okay. The third opinion, I'm sorry, I'm not slept at all. Chachamim say, Ein bein shua lecharata shtei mesri amma. There are less than 12 amos of space between one row of gourds and its neighbor. Lo yikayim es zer shabrin time. He may not keep the onion plants between them. The Chachamim agree with the Rishmal that 12 amos are needed between one row of gourds and the next. They agree with the Rakiya that it's not necessary to do a 2 amma gap between the gourds and the onions. Okay, moving right along. The last Mishnah design is a long one. The last Kiyeret. A Greek gourd planted next to a vegetable field is like any other kind of vegetable planted next to a field of different vegetables, meaning that it must be separated by a gap of 6 tvach. And if we wish to plant it next to a grain field, we must give it a base rova, the same as any other vegetable planted next to a grain field. If this field is planted with grain, and he wished to plant a row of Greek gourds in it, we give it 6 tvachim for its work area to serve as a separation. But if the row of gourds afterwards grew large and its leaves spread into 6 tefach gap, he must uproot the grain in front of it to maintain the 6 tefach gap. Rabbi Yossi says, no, still not abudasa arba amos. You must give it 4 amos for its work area to serve as a separation. A gap of 4 amos must be left between the rows of gourds and the grain. And the Chachamim say, Amullah, they said to him, will you treat this case more strict, this case of gourds in the field of grain, more strictly than we treat a row of grapevines? And that the law of Kilayim is stricter for grapevines than for anything else. Yet the law is that a single row of grapevines does not have to be separated from other species by more than 6 tvachim. How then can you require 4 amma separation for a single row of gourds? Doesn't make any sense. So Rabbi Yossi says, he responded, we find that the law for gourds is stricter than for the grapevine. How so? So the Gavin Yechidis Nosnin la avodas shisha tvach. Because for a single grapevine, we give just the 6 tvachim of its work area to serve as a separation from a field of grain. With the last yechidus nosnin la base rova. Whereas for a single gourd, we require base rova, as we learned at the beginning of the Mishnah. Both Yossi and the Chachamim agreed that a separation of a base rova is enough for a single gourd plant, planted next to a field of grain. Mishnah now brings another Tana who argues with this. Meir Omer Mishuma Rishmal, Meir says in him Rishmal, Kol Shlosha Deluin, the Beisa, whenever there are 3 gourds in the Beisa, the Beisa is 50 by 50 amas, as we spoke about previously. Lo Yavi Zera, the Sof Beisa, one may not bring other seeds into the Beisa. According to Meir, we must leave an empty space of 1/3 on the Beisa around the gourd, because being able to plant another species, before being able to plant another species. And Rabbi Yossi ben Hachotif Efrasi Amar Mishuma Rishmal. Rabbi Yossi ben Hachotif Efrasi said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, he said a different girsa. Kol shlosh delun in the base core. Whenever there are 3 gourds in the base core, which is 30 base lo yavi zera the soft base core. One may not bring other seeds into the base core. Okay, that's the end of Mishnah Gimel. Tomorrow we continue with Mishnah Daled. Have a wonderful day.